Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch, Serman, and I'm thrilled to have you here with me on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for those who are wanting to create financial wellness, and we're going to look at different life cycles and we're going to explore them both financially as well as emotionally, because personal finances are usually not about your money. They are actually about the emotions associated with your finances. Although we're going to be fairly general in our discussion, we'd love to hear from you and make it more personal and relevant. So you can call in, you can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Or you can post your comments and questions on Facebook or YouTube or wherever else you might be watching. Today, we are going to explore, can I afford the home? This is such an important question. And I get asked this question a lot, but I think more than I get asked, it gets ignored or just not thought through to the depths that it should. There's a lot of things that you need to consider, a lot of factors that you want to walk through and think through, whether you're looking to change your home, relocate, get divorced. This question should be asked on an emotional level, on a financial level. It should be taking your family situation into account. And today we have with us Leslie Glazier joining us to discuss this topic. And Leslie is a top 1% Chicago realtor, a certified divorce real estate expert. And I would just like to add, she is an amazing resource, somebody I have referred several of my clients to and happy to do so, and always got great feedback on it. Leslie, thank you for joining and being here with me today.
Thank you, Hirsch. It was so nice for you to invite me, and it's such a pleasure to be on the show.
So I was just saying earlier, Leslie was my very first guest ever. So it's always nice to have you back. And I'm going to ask if you could just share a little bit about your background so people understand a little bit more who they're hearing from.
Of course, yeah. I'm a residential real estate broker with that properties, and I have a niche. I specialize in divorce real estate, as you know, and I work in downtown Chicago and the North Shore.
So, we've heard lately that the world shut down because of COVID. Now we're hearing it's opening up. We've heard rates are at historical lows, and now we're hearing they're going up. I think there's in general, a lot of misinformation that's out there when it comes to real estate markets. And right now, I think the misconceptions are probably more than ever. I do understand that real estate is localized to your market, where you're living. But I'm going to ask, can you bring a little clarity and a little perspective to what's going on at this point in time?
It's a great question, and I get asked that all the time. As you know, it's an incredibly unique time as economics across the globe emerge from this pandemic. And in the near term, rates have actually ticked down a bit over the last 2 weeks. But with that said, my lender colleagues expect that it will continue to kind of have an upward pressure on rates over the long term.
So, I think, one of the things, people always want to get the lowest rate, but that doesn't always mean that is the best mortgage for them, as an example, because there's other fees, there's other ways that it could be padded, so to speak. And rates, without a doubt, are certainly very low right now. And even with this edging up, this uptick, since it's historical low, they still are very low historically. Do you have any thoughts, or have you seen any research indicating what will happen with mortgage rates? You hinted at that just now, but the other piece to that is, with the move in interest rates and mortgage rates, how might this impact the real estate markets?
Well, I haven't seen a lot of research, but I have, heard a lot of speculation and conversations. There's a ton of articles. Everyone has a different story about it. I do expect that there'll be another flurry of real estate activity as, consumers brace for rising rates, both purchase, and refinance. I expect things to remain very busy throughout the end of the year and into next year. I think the other big factor in our market is the lack of inventory. And again, as you said, that's the hyper-local. The city versus the suburbs are different in their own respects. And I don't see that trend changing anytime soon.
So when you say inventory, that word I think is thrown out a lot in articles and news broadcasts, but I'm not 100% sure people really understand when they say there's a lack of inventory. What is, it's not like a shoe store that, are we out of size 10, Can you talk a little bit more about what that means? When people say inventory, what are they really talking about in the real estate markets?
Well, it depends on where you are. So I'm sure you've heard that in the suburbs, houses are just going off the shelf, as you say, for sure. I mean, they're going super, super quickly. And the city is a different story. Last year in the fall, we were not seeing many buyers that were interested in high rises. And mainly that was because, during the pandemic, you'd have to wait 10, 15, 20 minutes for an elevator to go, to your unit because you can only have 3 or 4 people in the elevator. So people got frustrated by that. And as well as they're paying for amenities and the high rise and they couldn't use them. So we did see, a tick down in terms of high rise, but this year they've kind of come back up again. People wanting to move to the city and then a lot of relocation. So people are relocating back into the city, which didn't happen last year. So inventory is supply and demand. Inventory is lower for properties that have outdoor space, yard space, places in the home where people can work and be. So everyone seems to want not that 1 bedroom, but the 1 bedroom plus den, or the 3 bedroom plus den, or the yard, or the patio. So it's a matter of supply and demand at this point.
Right, I would imagine, COVID had people rethinking city life, and I saw this in a bunch of places, not just in Chicago. They would look at, as you said, the high rise, just the inconvenience of your elevator. That was never something people ever thought about. They were thinking they're going to, the 15th floor, they'd have a beautiful view, but, the frustration of getting to that 15th floor, plays in as well. With this dynamic of people coming back into the city, of you said a bit of a surge in whether it's refinancing or people buying before rates really start to rise, is that going to impact the price? And again, I'm not asking you to put this in writing, but speculating, will it impact prices? Is it expected to impact prices in that way? Because when there's more activity and more demand like that, I think sometimes people, it's a bit of a seller's market in some of those instances.
Well, the prices, that we have a lot of multiple offer situations on properties that are turnkey or have good value. If you have not upgraded your unit from 03, 07, that is not going to increase tremendously.
Right.
So it's still a matter of price. We have clients that won't even make an offer on a property unless they feel it's fairly priced, versus, in some other states that we're hearing about that things are going $35,000, $50,000 over ask. That is not happening in downtown Chicago.
Right.
It might be a small percentage increase, 5, 10, 15,000, but we're still very careful. People are still very aware about appraisals. And that seems to be a lot more in the forefront than my colleagues that are working in, warmer climates where people are flocking, whether it's California or Miami.
So I think that brings up, obviously, just the awareness of your market and being educated. And that's one of the very, very important things in working with somebody like yourself who becomes that advocate and that resource and that knowledge base. When somebody goes and looks at a home, they need the right expectations. If they're thinking $300,000, but the average home in the neighborhood they're looking at is going $50,000 over, price, that puts them at $350,000. Is that something they're even willing to entertain? Are they willing to modify? Are they willing to maybe wait a little bit because they think it's too high? So having the right expectation, it's nice to say, I have my own real estate, I have my own home, I have my own piece of dirt. But at what cost, I think, often is a piece of that as well that becomes. And as you said, understanding that inventory, if all of a sudden there's a surge in buying and there's no inventory, well, what does that mean for me as an individual? As we said, this is so localized. We absolutely need to understand our locality. And, that's where I think working with somebody is so important, and having that understanding. So earlier you did say that you have a very strong focus in divorce, which I'm aware of. And we said that you are a certified divorce real estate expert. And I think not just that you have the knowledge and experience of working in the market and the real estate markets for so long, but this really does change the game in many ways for people going through a divorce. Can you share a little bit more about what this certification is, how you got it, and how it brings your expertise a little bit in working with people going through divorce to a higher level?
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I get that question a lot. A certified divorce real estate expert handles real property and family law cases. So basically, I'm a neutral expert who's been trained. It's master level training by the Alumni Institute in California, and it was it's been going on for years, and we continue with our training, and it helps divorcing spouses break down the emotion and get the facts, in place in terms of how they're going to sell their home.
So, I do want to point out for people, you go back 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was common. You got a divorce attorney, you went through your divorce, and you were kind of done. There are so many resources now helping you in the components of your divorce that there weren't just a few years ago. And one of them is someone like Leslie, who's a CDRE. From my perspective, the finance side is also a relatively new thing. And people need to understand that there are wonderful resources out there to help them to get through a very challenging time, to be an objective view in the CDRE role as a neutral. That's something that becomes very, very important as well, because sometimes I've heard a lot when I'm working with clients, I can't speak to my spouse. They're not going to listen to me, whatever it might be. This is a resource now that can really be that intermediary and objective and be able to bring the parties together in a way that they might not be able to if they're working with a regular real estate agent that just really is not experienced or understanding of this dynamic, which is a very different dynamic, quite honestly, as well. And so that neutral is a very important role. And you couple that with understanding the dynamic, helping you get through the fog of emotions that are associated with the divorce and the tension and the adversity that often is in the process, unfortunately, as well. So I'm going to get off my soapbox and I'm going to come back to the home. The home is often the most expensive, largest valued item in a marriage. Many of the people don't look at it that way. They look at it as, this is where I live, which it is. Going through a divorce, they might see it as consistency from pre, through, and beyond the divorce. And that can be, they might look at it as kind of a security thing, not have to move and be able to, have some security around where they've been for a while. And these may all be true, but they're also emotional responses, if I can say that. And quite honestly, it may not be the best decision for somebody, even with all of those things being true. So how do you help people sometimes have to move from that emotional decision to a more logical, maybe financial decision, not to be too cold on this, but especially knowing that they are in this emotional state, they're not necessarily always thinking through things at their best.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And it's one of the first questions I get asked, can I keep the house? And more importantly, we have to decide, can they and why? Why do they want to stay? It's kind of home is where the heart is, and then we have to kind of convert it and say, this is your asset, and we have to treat it like a business decision, which is very difficult. And that knee-jerk reaction made it be to look for ways to stay in the home. Who wants to add a house hunt, in the middle of moving for divorce?
Yeah, and some of the other things to put in perspective, I've dealt with people who their kids are leaving in 2 years. They're going to college, or they graduate in college and leaving. You've never done maintenance. You've never done the housework. You've never done the gardening. All of a sudden, if you're the one that's got to do all of these things, is this really what you want to be doing? And can you even fit it in with everything else going? So again, we opened the show by saying there are a lot of factors to think through. It could be emotional, it could be practical, it could be affordability. I think these are all things that just become so important for people to think through as well. And that affordability, I see too often, unfortunately, where people almost become like a slave to their things, or they should be owning the home, but the home could be so expensive, it could almost be owning them and their time. So that is something that people really also need to be thinking through from all of those perspectives as well. So Leslie, we're going to start going into a break in a couple of minutes. I'm going to ask, how can people kind of reach out? How can they reach you? How can they touch base with you to learn more about what you do, or if they need your services? How do they reach you?
On my website, leslieglazergroup.com, and I have a Calendly, and you can certainly sign up to ask questions, anything divorce real estate related. That is, there's no charge there. Or Leslie at leslieglazer.com.
And I would say also with that, one of the things that I like about Leslie's situation with At Properties, you may be sitting in Florida, you may be sitting anywhere in the US. They are actually part of a network of brokers that work with each other and refer each other. So if you need somebody with the expertise that Leslie has, you can reach out to her. She can work with you, so to speak, with the divorce side of things maybe, but help you and refer you to a local agent who can help you in your locale as well, which becomes a really nice resource to be able to stretch across the country, and they're actually international as well. The other piece to that is if you are relocating, sometimes it's hard to know that place where you go in Chicago. A lot of people, 6.5 million people, a lot of people do move there. So again, another opportunity to use the resource that there is. We are going to take a short break. We're going to pay some bills, and we will be right back. Hello and welcome back to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am Hirsch, Serman, your host. And today we have Leslie Glazier from the Leslie Glazier Group at Properties. We are on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. And I'm going to recap a few of the things that we've spoken about, because we've spoken about a lot of things. Sometimes we forget about them because they're in the first 3 or 4 minutes of the show. We spoke about, and I'm going to try to read my handwriting as I scroll it all down. We spoke a little bit about the overview of what's happening, the rates going up, the rates going down, the world shutting down, the world opening up, those interest rates, how they play in with mortgages, that they're at historical lows. They might be inching up, but they're still very low, and you need to put it into perspective of the larger mortgage that you're getting. We spoke a little bit about the impact on the markets. We spoke about Leslie's certification, that there is a specialty within the divorce world. Not that that takes away any of her expertise in regular sales or purchasing of homes either, that I think is important. We did speak a little bit about the emotions, and that a lot of people have this as an emotional decision. We needed to think, unfortunately, trying to get a little bit into my MBA CPA brain that I have, that it is a little bit of a financial decision. We do need to understand the affordability of the home, which is obviously the major topic of today, and understanding some of those factors that play in. You know, the one thing that we didn't mention that I think is something is very important to bring into the discussion is, and I've had this was probably one of the very first questions I actually ever got when I was working in the divorce world about 5 or 6 years ago. They wanted to discuss the home with me. It was like a one-line email. I'd like to discuss the home with you. When do you have time? And the truth is that as important as this decision is, and the discussion around the home, it really does need to be put into the larger picture. If I'm getting the home, I need to figure out, how am I buying out my spouse? What are the other assets that come into play that I might be able to use? Is there some creativity that we might be able to do in order to work this out? So I think understanding that although it may be your largest asset, as we spoke about earlier, it is one piece of a larger puzzle, and there is a larger financial picture that we do need to take into account. And Leslie, I imagine, I'm sure you have, I have as well, I've worked with people, and you're just not sure that this is the right home for them. That could be for their family, that could be, where they are in life, or potentially quite a big one could be the affordability of this home. We love the home, but we don't always think about that sticker price that comes with it. Because again, as we were saying earlier, this is where we live. It becomes an emotional place for us. So how do you guide people to think through the affordability of the home, or to think through whether this is really the right home for them?
Hirsch, that's the key question that I get all the time. And, as a neutral party, I help empower clients and educate them in their choices when it comes to real estate and the next chapter. The first piece is putting a value on the home, and, having them really understand equity and what they'd be getting, and break things down in more of a business-like way. Many times divorcing homeowners will, dig their heels in and want to stay, but not know the consequences. As you said, this is really a right decision economically, and that's when the why comes into factor. Why do you want to stay? And when you break things down and say, okay, here's going to be your maintenance over years in terms of repairs, and how you're going to maintain the home and the expense, it kind of tends to be a little fog over people's eyes and say, do I really want to handle that all by myself? And, so we try to really break down the pieces and, have people understand what they're getting into, and can they even afford it?
Right. So there's two pieces. One is the affordability of buying a new home. One of them is the affordability of keeping a home. And then obviously if they move to that step to say, wow, we maybe need to sell this, or, I'm buying the spouse out. We got to be careful on how we price a home. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the impact, the negative impact, more than likely, I'm assuming, if you overprice a home, because we are emotionally attached to our homes. We believe they're worth more than they are because, hey, it's the best home in the world. It's mine, right? So what happens when somebody overprices a home? How does that actually, usually, potentially anyway, hurt them as opposed to help them?
Well, it's a lot of energy and time for everybody. It's a lot of energy for them to keep the house neat and clean, move out, stay out of the house for showings, for just spinning their wheels. So besides the fact that it is racking market time, and people are saying, wow, it's been on the market a long time. What's going on? Why? What's wrong with the house? It's not a positive reflection for buyers to see this, and they want to know, is the seller just being completely unrealistic? And why would we even ever make an offer? Because they're just not even in the right, zone.
So part of it is the perception that you creating in the market is what I'm hearing when it sits there. You did say earlier that so much revolves around price. And so I'm assuming, if you're, and I'm making these numbers up, obviously, if you're 15% higher than everybody else in your neighborhood, that's going to reflect quite strongly when they come walking through and going, I don't know that this is worth the price that they're asking for. So it's a real financial piece when you overprice it, I guess, because there are other houses on the market. But then I guess also the emotional side of a buyer wanting to see that house, buy that house. You're creating a perception out there. And so then I decide, okay, I'm going to be realistic. I'm going to drop my price. What does that create when somebody sees, they dropped their price? Does that reek of desperation? What does that do when somebody drops their price because they've overpriced it?
It's a good thing. It really drives in more buyers and more interest. Buyers will search in increments of a certain amount, whether it's 350, 450. So you might capture a whole new group of people that are looking up to that threshold. So that's a good thing. It also has a reflection for buyers to say, hey, now their sellers are being more realistic. Now, on the flip side, sellers will think, I just reduced $25,000. I'm not going to negotiate. So you have to, walk down that path and put kind of a precedence on what, what the reality is on the market. It's not personal. We're not attacking that, there's something's wrong with their home. It's just what the market bears and what an appraiser will value the home, which is key.
And then it sounds like there might be a whole new education for the seller once they've dropped it to say, you still need to keep an open mind on the negotiation side. And I think a big piece that people don't always think about as well is they have a carrying cost on that home. They've got a mortgage, they've got real estate taxes, they've got the utilities, whatever else comes up. And that plays in. I would imagine that's a big piece of it as well. That plays into that they should, be a little bit more flexible, because when you think about the large picture, that $5,000 or $10,000 versus carrying it for another 3 months, you can actually be in the hole from that perspective. But it's nice to hear, I think some people have the impression if I drop the price, it shows I'm desperate. But you're saying it actually is a positive because you're introducing this home to a whole new slew of potential buyers that may not have looked at your home before.
And also, Hirsch, and time is of the essence. If you sold last month versus in 2 months, is there a big rainstorm where you could get a leak? Or are you in a condo building, all of a sudden they're going to slate a special assessment, which wasn't there 2 or 3 months ago? I mean, things change every day.
Right. And that's the other thing people really do need to understand is that the markets are dynamic and they are changing every day.
Yeah.
You know, another house comes on the market 2 doors down, or your interest rates change and they change daily. Anything could happen. So when you mostly selling, I guess, but if there are any on the buyer's side as well, but are there any kind of must-do moves that you recommend for people that are selling, or like a checklist, these things kind of have to be in place when somebody's selling a home?
Well, I would go to the store and get 50 boxes and declutter as much as possible. That's probably the must-do for 90% of people. I would say declutter, depersonalize, and then really know your numbers. I go through people, sellers with a net sheet with, the amount we think we're going to sell and what they're going to net. So there's no surprises. They understand where, the closing costs, because, in Illinois, they're very different than other states. Just empowering them with knowledge of the process.
Okay. And then you said declutter and depersonalize.
Yes. Okay, so we don't want any of their, infamous collections on whatever they're collecting, all over the house. We want to keep things, we want buyers to envision themselves living in the home. So we want to make it as neutral as possible. And it's almost the opposite of design, interior design. It's making things just kind of vanilla box, being able to see when they walk in, whether they are traditional, if they're modern, they can just envision themselves in the space.
Right. So the space is what you want to really highlight, because that's what you want to sell, obviously. And I've heard that, by the way, that I have dealt with people that have even removed pictures of their own family because they don't want them, the people walking through their home, to envision their family. They want them to envision their own family, right? So I think being able to highlight the space and the advantages of the home, as opposed to that you've been collecting, 6,000 porcelain dolls that are all over your house for the last 40 years is less important, obviously. But I think that becomes very, very important. And does this change, and probably not, but maybe I'm going to ask it anyway, does this change whether you're going through a divorce, whether you're relocating, whether you're upgrading, whether you're downgrading your home, or is it just, I'm selling my home, this is what I need to kind of do to sell it?
Well, that's a good question. Divorce is a little bit more intricate because normally you're working with sellers that are on the same page. And with divorce real estate, typically they're not, but sometimes they are. But in terms of getting your home ready, absolutely, it is still the keeping things neutral, decluttering, trying to get as many repairs done as possible. Listen to your broker, because they really know what they're talking about, not their friend or someone down the block that has, just sold their house and, has all the answers.
Right.
Yeah.
And then on the buying side, I mean, there've got to be some moves there as well that people can do to get ready, right? So I know that one of the big ones is to be ready to go with a mortgage. So, you don't want to walk in and go, I'll get back to you in 45 days when I'm approved, kind of thing. So what are there any other thoughts around the buyer and what the buyer should do to get ready?
Well, as you said, that, to make sure that they understand what they can afford and be able to get a pre-approval before. They don't have to get a pre-approval when they're looking online and getting educated, but by the time you start to go look at properties, especially, in the past year and a half with COVID, sellers want you to be pre-approved and serious, to come into their home. And it's also good for the buyers, because they really, why waste your time on something that you can't afford?
Right.
So that's the first piece. The other piece, which I actually have a little tool on my website, Leslie Glazier Group, which I love, is you can go on there and, besides being a mortgage calculator, it can tell you what your costs are at closing. So if you purchase something for X price, it will tell you what you're going to, what you need to bring to closing for the most part, which is really helpful, because a lot of people don't realize we're an attorney state. We have to understand what that means.
Right.
Not an equity state, as well as closing costs, having an inspection, and just going through the whole timeline.
And that is an important thing that people need to understand. You know, if you're putting $50,000 down on a home, it doesn't mean that you got to have $50,000 at closing. There are other closing costs. You certainly, the last thing you want is being all excited about buying a new home, coming to closing and realizing I can't close. I don't have the money that I need here. So very, very important. And just be very careful also in making sure that your money is there on time to the right people and all the rest that happens there. So on the flip side of getting ready and the things you must do, what are some of the common financial fumbling, staging slip-ups? Like, what are some of the things that you see people doing that they shouldn't be doing maybe when they're selling or buying a home?
Well, I think it's important to know your loan balance. You know, a lot of people make the mistake, and understandably, the loan balance isn't necessarily what's on your statement. You'd have to order a payoff letter. And the reason that there's a difference is loan modifications are not on your statement, and if there's any late fees, you know, that you didn't even realize you had from 2, 3, 4 years ago, those will be on your payoff. So it is important to actually know your numbers. Staging, I would say, don't try to stage it yourself. You know, have a professional advice, whether it's actual staging, having a company come in, having your broker move your furniture around or advise you on how to move stuff around or declutter. Or I do a lot of virtual staging, especially if a property is vacant. And it enables people to envision, you know, oh, yes, I can fit a king bed in this space, or yes, the dining room will fit in the kitchen, you know, whatnot. So I could probably go on and on with that question. That's a loaded question.
Yeah, that is huge. I think sometimes it's easier to lose the sale than get the sale by doing some of these things, you know. But anyway, as you said, you could probably speak all day, and unfortunately we don't have all day because we've got to start wrapping up. So I'm going to ask again, though, if you can share, how can people get in touch with you? And please, I recommend for people, it's so important to work with a professional who really understands what is going on. And that's something that is so important, something that Leslie brings. But Leslie, how can people get in touch with you, please?
My website, leslieglazergroup.com. My email, feel free to email me with any questions, leslie@leslieglazer.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Leslie. This is such an important topic, such a really misunderstood topic as well. So I really appreciate you shedding such great information, insights, shedding such light. The real estate markets are constantly in motion, as we said. And having an experienced advocate like Leslie on your side is highly recommended. I think sometimes part of that misinformation is people hear things that are 3 months and 6 months behind what's actually happening. And that can make a big difference, especially in the world that we're living in today. I am Hirsch Serman, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. I'd like to thank CC Schatz, who is always behind the scenes but making everything happen, and I very much appreciate all you do. Please reach out to me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That is lifecycle.financial. In case you have any questions, or if you want to reach out for Leslie as well and you missed her information, I can gladly share that with you too. And Leslie, thank you once more, and I look forward to you joining me on my next show in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hirsch.